We cataloged humanity the way we cataloged all emerging species, clinically, efficiently, without malice. A single inhabited world, atmospheric dependency within narrow tolerances, propulsion systems still shackled to chemical fire and fragile fusion, political structures fractured into rival states that competed more often than they cooperated. Every metric placed them precisely where countless others had been before them, curious, ambitious, and temporary. From orbit, their planet was beautiful in a way that felt unintentional. Cities glimmered like scattered embers across the night side, fragile lights clinging to coastlines and river veins. To us, it looked unfinished, exposed, vulnerable. I remember thinking that if we pressed just hard enough, those lights would blink out one by one, like breath held too long. Our historians were confident. Species so divided, they said, could never truly unite. Internal conflict was a rot that no external threat could fully cauterize. When first contact devolved into misunderstanding, voices raised, symbols misread, warnings interpreted as demands, we anticipated the usual pattern: panic, disorder, desperate pleas for negotiation from competing factions speaking with fractured tongues. Instead, there was silence. Not the silence of collapse, but the silence of breath drawn in. Our sensors recorded a flurry of activity beneath that quiet. Human military assets began to move, not smoothly, not elegantly, but urgently. Ships launched ahead of finalized plans. Defense grids activated in uneven patterns. Their communications channels erupted with overlapping voices, arguments, reassurances, promises. It should have been chaos. By our models, it was chaos. Yet something strange threaded through it: emotion, resolve. Where our commands flowed from centralized logic cores, theirs spilled outward from millions of individual wills. They did not wait for perfection. They moved with purpose instead. I dismissed the unease in my thoracic cavity as inexperience. Our opening strike was measured, strategic, merciful by our standards. We disabled orbital satellites with precision beams, careful to avoid unnecessary loss of life. We shattered communication relays, severed power networks, crippled transportation hubs. The intent was clear: demonstrate inevitability, break their ability to coordinate, then offer terms while their fear was fresh. We waited for surrender. Minutes passed, then hours. Instead of capitulation, a signal emerged, weak at first, then unmistakable. Humans were broadcasting, not on a protected military band, but across every frequency they could access. Civilian channels, emergency wavelengths, even outdated analog spectrums we believed obsolete. We prepared countermeasures, assuming propaganda or pleas. What we received was neither. There was no single leader addressing us, no trembling diplomat, no demand. It was a composite transmission, voices layered atop one another, images intercut with raw data.
Cities burning, children being evacuated, soldiers strapping on armor with shaking hands, medics working without pause, factories repurposed in real time, farmers standing in front of fields they knew would soon be hash. And beneath it all, a simple declaration, repeated in countless languages and accents, distorted by damage and fear. We will endure. Not we will win, not we demand mercy, just endurance. It unsettled my entire command cadre. Endurance was not a strategy. Endurance was what came after strategy failed. To build a war doctrine around it was irrational. I replayed the transmission again and again. There was no bravado in it, no attempt to intimidate, only acceptance. As if humanity had already calculated the cost and decided collectively that it was payable. The word lingered in the chamber like a toxin: meaning. Our models had no variable for it. Still, doctrine prevailed. Endurance without superiority always broke eventually. Resources depleted, morale collapsed, biology failed. The humans would tire. They always did. We advanced. As our fleets moved deeper into their orbital space, resistance stiffened instead of fracturing. Improvised human fighters swarmed our scouts, piloted by individuals who should have fled but did not. Ground-based weapons fired until their barrels melted. Civilian vessels rammed themselves into our drones with suicidal precision. Losses mounted on both sides, but the expected psychological markers never appeared. Human transmissions did not beg for ceasefire. They documented, they remembered, They named their dead aloud. For the first time since I earned my command crest, doubt crept into my calculations. Perhaps fragility was not the same as weakness. Perhaps we had mistaken the glow of their cities for something it was not. From orbit, those lights no longer looked like embers. They looked like eyes, open, unblinking, watching us advance. And somewhere deep within my core, an unspoken realization began to form, sharp and unwelcome. If this was how humanity endured at the beginning of a war, what would they become whence patience was gone? The first ground engagements arrived like storms we had predicted would be brief, unremarkable. Yet from the moment our orbital dropships breached their atmosphere, the humans defied every expectation. Units we had calculated would scatter instead held positions, even when surrounded, even when outgunned. Retreats became counterattacks. Routes intended for orderly withdrawal became ambush corridors lined with traps we had not programmed into our simulations. Losses were not measured in despair. They became fuel. Every casualty seemed to sharpen the edges of those who remained. We intercepted their communications, anticipating the static of panic. What we found instead were stories. Names shouted aloud across radio frequencies. Memories recited with trembling voices. Vows exchanged over broken signals. Promises to avenge. To protect. To endure.
A medic whispered the life history of a fallen soldier while stitching another back together. A commander relayed the exploits of units that no longer existed, ensuring that the galaxy would not forget them. Their culture of remembrance was weaponized in real time. Civilians, contrary to all our models, did not flee. Instead, they fortified, they organized. Schools became bunkers. Factories transformed overnight into arsenals, pumping out weapons, munitions, and armor with uncanny speed. Artists wielded paint and digital mediums alike, creating warnings, symbols, and memorials that spread faster than any signal jammer we deployed. Every human became part of the resistance, not by order, but by instinct. Our commanders grew agitated. The metrics were incongruous. We destroyed infrastructure, we claimed territory, yet morale indicators remained stubbornly high. Humans adapted faster than our learning algorithms could process. They scavenged destroyed vehicles to create mobile fortresses. They weaponized debris from collapsed cities. They rerouted energy lines and repurposed failing satellites to support frontline operations. Scarcity did not fracture them, it fused them. I began to understand something unsettling. Humans did not fight merely to survive. They fought to protect meaning, history, identity, the fragile idea of tomorrow. Each loss was cataloged, named, remembered. You cannot intimidate a species that measures existence in stories rather than statistics. Their courage was cumulative, their resolve infectious. Every signal, every movement, every act of defiance created a lattice of determination stronger than any shield. Still, we pressed forward. Confidence in our doctrine had not yet faltered. Pressure, we believed, would eventually shatter them. Every strategy we employed assumed breaking points. Yet with each engagement, it became clear. Pressure did not break humanity. Pressure shaped them, compressed them into something harder, sharper, and far more dangerous than we had anticipated. I watched from the command deck as human units, ragged and outnumbered, executed maneuvers that defied geometry, probability, and reason. They were learning in battle, improvising in real time, reacting in ways no algorithm could predict. And then I realized the humans were not merely surviving, they were becoming. The unsettling truth settled over the fleet like a shadow. We had never faced a species that turned adversity into refinement, and we were only at the beginning. Every projection we had made, every calculation of victory, was about to be rewritten. The galaxy had underestimated them, and I wondered if we would live to understand just how far their resilience could stretch. The moment came quietly. There was no grand announcement, no dramatic ultimatum broadcast across space. No signal flared to mark the change, no trembling voice declared defiance. Our sensors detected only an imperceptible shift at first, subtle adjustments in fleet movements, a slight acceleration in the cadence of communication, patterns that were simultaneously chaotic and coordinated. Our analysts scrambled to quantify it, feeding every observable behavior into prediction matrices, yet nothing fit. The humans, it seemed, had rewritten the rules in real time. Their strikes, once reactive and measured, became anticipatory. They targeted not just military assets, but symbols. Command centers, communication hubs, even memorials to fallen units, all became tactical objectives. They fought for territory, yes, but they also fought for meaning. It was as if every act of destruction, every skirmish, carried an embedded message. We are here, we endure, we remember. At first, we dismissed it as desperation. A species pressed to the limit often lashes out irrationally. But this was different. The humans were holding back, until they no longer did. The realization struck us slowly, like the creeping cold of deep space. Humanity had been restrained all along, conserving effort, conserving outrage, calculating the moment to act decisively. And that moment had arrived. Their counteroffensive was brutal, it was chaotic, it was horrifyingly inefficient, and terrifyingly effective. Ships were sacrificed not out of incompetence, but as deliberate gambits, creating openings for others to exploit. Entire fleets were baited into gravitational traps, maneuvered with such precision it suggested foresight beyond human design. We witnessed orbital debris being weaponized against our cruisers, satellites, cargo modules, even fragments of destroyed stations hurled in orchestrated arcs. They had turned their planet into an extension of their military, bending everything they had into tools of survival and lesson alike. What terrified us most was not the scale of destruction, though that was immense. It was the resolve. Human commanders authorized maneuvers we considered unthinkable, not from fear, not from desperation, but from acceptance. They understood the costs, losses they could measure in lives, in ships, in shattered infrastructure, and they paid them willingly. Each casualty hardened them. Each failure strengthened the resolve of those who remained. There was no panic, no hesitation, only calculation and purpose, infused with a resolve that seemed almost spiritual. Our war doctrine, the foundation of every engagement we had ever fought, crumbled in their presence. Fear, the universal tool of compliance, was ineffective. Casualties, which in every other species slowed momentum or fractured cohesion, only intensified their coordination. The more we punished them, the more unified they became. Where we expected disorder, there was synchrony. Where we expected despair, there was ingenuity. This was not rage. This was patience ending. And in the quiet, I realized the enormity of what we were witnessing.
Humanity had crossed a threshold, a psychological boundary no other species had ever approached. They were no longer defending their world. They were defending a line drawn inside themselves, a moral and cultural frontier that demanded protection at any cost. And nothing, no entity, no force in the galaxy had ever moved them once that line was drawn. Our fleets faltered, not from power, but from uncertainty. Every maneuver, every strategy we attempted was countered not by superior weaponry, but by anticipation, by instinct, by the raw cohesion of millions of wills aligned to a single principle. They would endure. They would not yield. They would not pause. And then it became terrifyingly clear. This was only the beginning. The patience we had mistaken for submission was now a weapon far sharper than any plasma cannon, any orbital strike. We had provoked not desperation, but a species that had studied its own limits, measured its endurance, and decided that the moment for restraint was over. The skies above their world erupted in chaos, yet chaos as orchestrated as a symphony. Human ships darted unpredictably, striking weak points, drawing us into traps we did not see until it was too late. Their artillery rained from orbital platforms with uncanny accuracy. Their infantry moved across ruined cities with a discipline that defied expectation. Every action seemed improvised, yet every action contributed to a larger pattern we could not comprehend. In the command bridge, my officers murmured calculations that made no sense. Algorithms ran endlessly, searching for patterns in the seeming randomness of human attacks. No model could account for the coordination, the ingenuity, the relentlessness. Each human loss was cataloged, remembered, honored in ways that inspired others to fight harder. Human storytelling had become a weapon, their collective memory a battlefield. And then, like a revelation, the full implications settled across our minds. We were witnessing the awakening of a species that had prepared not just to survive, but to endure beyond reason. The moment humanity's patience snapped was not loud, it was quiet, methodical, terrifying in its inevitability, and once that line had been crossed, there was no turning back. We had thought ourselves gods to them. We were now subjects of their attention, studying our limits as carefully as they had measured theirs. And somewhere deep within, I understood, in the vast, indifferent galaxy, no species would ever forget this day, the day patience ended and humanity began. The sensors lit up again. Another fleet appeared on the horizon, drawn into a trap we could not predict. And as our ships accelerated toward them, I felt the first true twinge of fear, not for myself, but for my people, and for what the universe might learn from the species that refuses to yield. If part 1 was the snap, the sudden, undeniable shift in human resolve, part 2 was the aftermath. The galaxy felt it before it understood it.
Human tactics evolved with chilling precision. No longer were their actions reactive or defensive. Every strike, every maneuver carried intention, purpose, and a message. This is what happens when you push us too far. Their engagement was no longer about territory, resources, or survival. It was about teaching. Every explosion, every tactical sacrifice broadcast a lesson that spread faster than any communications array could carry it. They targeted our command vessels with surgical fury. We expected annihilation, yet what we saw was far more deliberate. They struck with calculated precision, yet left survivors deliberately intact. Those survivors returned to their fleets with first-hand accounts, humans moving without hesitation, striking without hatred, and yet without mercy. They executed their strategies with a serenity that was almost alien, calm, controlled, efficient. Their calm was worse than rage. It was acceptance. Acceptance of cost, of death, of ruin, and the willingness to pay it without flinching. Human leaders spoke openly of extinction-level sacrifice if required, not as threat, but as contingency. Entire cities volunteered to evacuate, to destroy themselves, to vanish entirely if it meant survival elsewhere. They weaponized unity itself, turning collective will into a force that no algorithm could counter. There was no hierarchy too rigid to fail, no chain of command too fragile to fracture. Humanity's resilience was communal, pervasive, and deliberate. Our fleets, trained to exploit hesitation, began to withdraw, not because of damage, not because of dwindling resources, but because of uncertainty. How do you defeat a species that will willingly burn its own future to deny you victory? Every engagement, every strategy we employed was countered not by conventional force, but by intent. Humanity was no longer asking if they could survive the war. They were deciding who deserved to. And in that terrible clarity, we learned a truth too late. Humanity's greatest weapon was not endurance, nor ingenuity, nor aggression. It was consent. The quiet, terrifying agreement of millions of individuals to act as one when restraint was no longer required. Once they collectively decided to unleash that force, the galaxy shifted beneath our feet. It was a force that reshaped probability itself. We attempted new strategies, new deployments, new calculations, but the pattern remained the same. Every maneuver was anticipated, every reaction preempted. Humans sacrificed ships to open corridors, evacuated cities to lure us into traps, weaponized their culture, their history, their own homeworld. They transformed loss into leverage, fear into cohesion. Witnessing this, I understood the full horror of what we faced. We had assumed that species could be bent by attrition, that patience could be measured in days or years, that endurance was finite. But humans were not finite. They were bound by principle, not by biology. Every action was calculated through the lens of meaning rather than mere survival.
Our admirals debated withdrawal in hushed tones. Fleet formations faltered. Calculations spun endlessly. How could one combat a species that, when cornered, did not seek survival, but justice, or perhaps equity, on a scale we could barely comprehend? Humanity's patience had ended, and the galaxy would never be the same. They were no longer fighting a war, they were establishing a rule, unspoken yet unbroken. Measure us carefully, or be measured in return. The ships that remained on the horizon quivered under the weight of their own hesitation. And as the humans moved with deliberate calm, a quiet truth settled across every command deck, every observer station, every distant civilization watching the unfolding events. We had underestimated them, we had misunderstood them, and now the galaxy itself would witness what happens when a species consents to unleash its full, deliberate force. Once restraint was gone, there was no returning. The galaxy had crossed a threshold. Humanity had chosen, and everything that followed would bear the mark of that choice. As the human counteroffensive expanded, the rest of the galaxy watched in a mix of awe, fear, and calculation. Some species observed from the safety of distant star systems, offering silent sympathy, quiet acknowledgement of lives lost and courage tested. Others weighed potential advantage, probing their own strategies, calculating where to intervene for profit or influence. But none dared act decisively, none crossed the threshold to interfere. Humanity noticed. They did not plead, they did not rage, they did not accuse, they simply recorded. Every battle, every skirmish, every deliberate sacrifice was catalogued. Data streams carrying video, telemetry, and first-hand accounts poured into open channels, not propaganda, not filtered reports, but raw, unvarnished documentation. Victories were broadcast alongside losses, triumphs alongside destruction, casualties alongside heroism. The galaxy saw not just what humanity could destroy, but what they endured. The transmission carried no words of justification, no pleas for sympathy. It was simply the truth of their existence under siege. This transparency unsettled observers in ways no weapon ever could. By refusing to frame their story, humanity forced others to observe it as it was, messy, brutal, and unwaveringly honest. Even as the galaxy weighed its own choices, humanity shaped perception through omission rather than declaration. They were inscribing themselves into memory, ensuring that no one could later claim ignorance or misinterpret intent. Those who had watched yet done nothing would not escape acknowledgement. Our own allies began to question us. Whispers filled command holes, quiet murmurs of doubt. Fear spread, not of the firepower humanity wielded, not of the ships, the weapons, the technology, but of the memory they would leave.
A species that survives not merely by strength, but by remembrance, creates a ledger in which betrayal cannot be erased. Every act of inaction was recorded, every hesitation catalogued. The galaxy itself could not ignore the testimony of human resilience. As pressure mounted, desperate attempts at negotiation were made. Messages, fleets, envoys, we reached out, seeking compromise, seeking understanding. Humanity responded slowly, deliberately. Each communication was measured, each pause deliberate, each reply weighed. They had learned patience from us, and in a quiet, terrifying way, they wielded it better. It became clear, in the cold analysis of command centers across our fleet, that the war had already been decided, not in explosions or tactical victories, but in perception and principle. Humanity had already dictated the terms of endurance, the standard by which the galaxy would be judged. The remaining question was no longer whether they would survive. That was assumed. The question now was, what kind of galaxy would survive them? Every observer, from the most distant probe to the most entrenched admiral, felt the weight of that question. Across systems and sectors, old alliances faltered, new calculations emerged, and every species that had looked away, or thought to exploit humanity's earlier restraint, now reconsidered their place in the unfolding history. And the humans did not protest. They did not demand acknowledgement. They simply existed, transmitting evidence of their struggle with a clarity that could not be ignored. Every transmission, every casualty, every act of endurance was a testament, a ledger written across the void. We understood then, the war had not been won by weapons or strategy, but by a principle older than any of us could comprehend. Humanity fought to ensure that the galaxy remembered them as they were, unbroken and unflinching. From that day onward, every calculation, every prediction,
every plan accounted for one immutable truth. In observing humanity, the galaxy had become part of their story, and history would not forget. The negotiations were almost anticlimactic. After months of conflict that had scarred worlds and shattered fleets, the humans approached not with anger or demand, but with clarity. They did not call for our extinction. There were no ultimatums to humiliate, no threats to annihilate. Instead, they demanded something far subtler, far more enduring: withdrawal, reparations, and acknowledgement, an official record stating in no uncertain terms why the war began, who escalated it, and who endured it. We listened in disbelief. Our historians and diplomats debated the request. What weight could words carry when fleets had already burned, cities had fallen, and civilizations had witnessed destruction on the scale that defied comprehension? But the humans insisted. The record was to be distributed across known space, not as a tool of propaganda, but as a permanent ledger of events.
They wanted the galaxy to know, not simply who won, but why, and at what cost. It was painful, meticulous, and deliberate. They demanded precision: dates, names, coordinates of strikes, collateral losses. Every act of aggression cataloged, every act of courage immortalized. Nothing could be omitted, nothing softened. The ledger would not hide their suffering, nor ours. It would exist as testimony, a reminder of responsibility, accountability, and endurance. We agreed, not because we had no choice, but because we understood the alternative. Humanity was finished proving anything. The next step would not have been conquest, it would have been correction, an erasure of our arrogance, a rewriting of assumptions we had clung to for millennia. In acknowledging their terms, we preserved not only the remnants of our fleets, but a fragile recognition of the consequences of underestimating them. As our ships withdrew from contested zones, we expected pursuit, perhaps vengeance. But none came. Humanity did not chase us. They did not gloat. They did not celebrate. They rebuilt. They mourned in quiet enclaves, raising makeshift memorials in cities that would never rise again. They cataloged the names of the fallen. They remembered. Their victory was not inscribed in monuments or statues. It was etched in silence, in the absence of celebration, in the deliberate act of enduring while refusing to destroy what remained. I returned to my people profoundly changed. We had faced powerful species before, some whose weapons could obliterate planets in minutes, some whose strategies bent lesser races to their will. But we had never faced one that redefined power itself. Humanity did not win through overwhelming force, superior numbers, or advanced technology. They won by something far more terrifying, by refusing to break. Every encounter, every battle, every lost vessel had been a lesson, not in tactics, but in will. We had assumed that victory came from dominance, from destruction, from fear. Humanity had shown us otherwise. Strength was not measured in firepower alone, but in the refusal to yield, in the discipline to endure, and in the clarity to insist that their story be told exactly as it happened. Even now, across light years and decades, the echo of their patience, of their deliberate insistence on truth, reverberates. Their record spreads, unflinching, uncompromising, a permanent testament to endurance. And we, my species, my command, every officer who bore witness, understand that this ledger will outlast fleets, empires, and perhaps even civilizations. We had underestimated them. We had misread the flicker of their cities as fragility, their coordination as chaos, their endurance as compliance. And yet, in refusing to break, humanity had imposed a new standard on the galaxy, a species that endures on principle, that insists on memory, that survives not through annihilation of others, but through the deliberate assertion of truth. In the silence that followed, I realized the depth of what we had faced. We had been defeated, yes, but not by weapons, nor by strategy, nor by attrition. We had been defeated by their constancy, their resolve, and the unyielding demand that the universe acknowledge who they were. And in that realization, I understood that power had a new form now, one humanity had mastered. Not conquest, not fear, not even vengeance. Humanity had won by refusing to break, and nothing, no fleet, no policy, no calculation, could undo that. Long after the war, the galaxy began to feel the subtle but undeniable influence of humanity, not through force, not through conquest, but through presence. Their fleets no longer blazed across systems to intimidate. Their envoys arrived in quiet corridors, speaking calmly, deliberately, with words measured yet unyielding.
And yet, the absence of aggression did not lessen their impact. Entire sectors deferred to their judgment, not because of fear, but because history had engraved a single truth into every observer. Humanity endured beyond reason, and endurance carries authority of its own. Among my people, the word human had shifted in meaning. It no longer implied primitive, no longer suggested an emerging species struggling against its own limitations. It had become a boundary, a constant. It represented the threshold beyond which pressure transforms into catastrophe. To test them was to risk annihilation, not through weaponry, but through principle. To provoke them was to invite consequences measured in history, memory, and relentless will. Even the most calculating of civilizations, the ones that prided themselves on strategy and foresight, now hesitated when their name appeared in reports. Humans became a quiet constant in galactic politics. Their fleets remained distant, but their reach extended through diplomacy, observation, and example. They did not need to strike. Their restraint was itself a warning. They did not need to destroy. Their endurance had already rewritten the rules of engagement. Across systems, races that once measured superiority in numbers or technology now measured it in patience, in the ability to resist, and in the unshakable unity of purpose. Humanity had transformed the galaxy without firing a shot. We learned their name not as conquerors, not as vanquished, not as victims. We learned it as survivors, as witnesses, as a species forever marked by an encounter that refused to be forgotten. Every fleet that had faced them, every diplomat that had bargained with them, every historian that had recorded their campaigns carried the memory of that lesson. Endurance is power, patience is strength, and meaning can outlast weapons. Their influence spread silently, subtly, and inevitably. The galaxy adjusted to their presence not out of fear of annihilation, but out of respect for the immutable truth they had demonstrated.
Civilizations that once dismissed fragile worlds as inconsequential now recalculated entire doctrines, entire philosophies, entire approaches to survival. Humanity became shorthand for a principle, a warning, a standard. And the lesson was clear, etched across the stars. Patience is not weakness. It can be tested, it can be pushed, but when it ends, even the vast, indifferent cosmos must answer. I remember the first time I fully understood this as I returned to my home system. My species had rebuilt, our fleets replenished, our calculations refined, but something fundamental had shifted. Across sectors and star systems, every commander, every diplomat, every observer knew what humanity represented. They had survived, yes, but more importantly, they had defined the limits of endurance for the rest of the galaxy. We would not forget. No species would. Their name, whispered, recorded, observed, carried weight far beyond its letters. Human. It had become a warning, a principle, a legacy, a measure by which all future interactions would be judged. And in the quiet moments, when the stars shone without movement, when fleets rested in orbit, I understood. We had not merely witnessed survival, we had witnessed transformation. Humanity had taken patience, endurance, and principle, and forged from them a power the galaxy could neither conquer nor ignore. We had learned their name, and that knowledge, once gained, would never be undone. Patience is not weakness, and when it ends, even the stars must answer.